Vanishing Narcissist and His Hidden World. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. As part of educating you about narcissism and psychopathy, I regularly utilize real-life examples as they very much help in driving home the message. I have here an instance of a woman who was involved with an individual who clearly exhibits the behavior of a narcissist, and she then set about uncovering his activities. This was published in the Times. Let's learn more about what transpired and how we can see that there was a narcissist at work, one who vanished, which then led to the uncovering of a hidden world. The victim of the narcissist is an individual called Shimen Suleiman. She explains, "I did not want an abortion, nor did I want a child. The doctor asked if I was sure, and in the absence of knowing how to say no, I nodded. She asked if I was alone. No, I told her. My partner was in the waiting room. I read his messages on my phone of how we'd get through this, false compassion, that we'd be home soon, eat ice cream and watch reruns of shows, and that he'd only gone to find the bathroom, and I should stay near the receptionist and wait for him. But later, as the waiting room emptied, as a young woman tapped the keyboard of her computer with perfectly pointed nails, I realized he was gone. He was gone, and my calls went only to voicemail. Accordingly, this individual, who was in a romantic relationship with this woman, disengaged from her while she was at a medical appointment. He didn't announce his departure. He didn't explain his departure. He just left her while she was carrying his child." She continues, "In the days that followed, I asked the building manager to show me the security footage of the hallway outside my New York apartment. I checked the time on the recording. When I had been with the doctor, he had climbed the stairs to my home and entered with a spare key. On the screen, I watched him carry his shirts to the garbage chute. On the screen, I watched him reappear with more of his belongings and throw those in too, before leaving with a bag full of his things and some of mine. Acid appropriation, sense of entitlement, lack of boundary recognition. Any desire I had to imagine a man who ran from the clinic or my apartment with pain or guilt, or a breakdown induced by the hours leading up to this, was replaced by the clear vision of a man entirely calm, entirely poised, entirely in control. That he had gone should not have been a surprise. He was always gone in some capacity or other. That began very early on, when he prepared me for, as he described them, his mental disabilities. His high-functioning autism, he said, that came with agoraphobia, and it was hard for him to commit to the things we had planned. Utilization of ill health for the purpose of manipulation. Nights out, if they happened at all, quickly turned into nights at home. My home. Monopolization of time, monopolization of property. And it seemed we were always up against something. Losing jobs and moving house, transport delays, and his mother's poor health, triangulation, his father's recurring absence, triangulation, and his sister's rape and his ex-girlfriend's death, triangulation, pity plays. When I'd originally matched with him on Tinder, hunting ground, our conversation was enjoyable. We messaged for a few weeks, then finally agreed to meet. He flirted, lack of boundary recognition, but kept it simple, briefly touching my arm, the occasional flattering remark. Flattery, form of manipulation. His friends were going to another bar, he said, and did I want to come? Outside, leaning against the dark green tiles, he asked if he could kiss me, and when it was time to leave, with the same graciousness, he asked if he could order my Uber home and pay for it. Bribery. A week later in a bar, we bonded over the particulars of my routines, the quirks and peculiarities we seemed to share so many of, mirroring, as he mirrored what mattered to me. We met again, a comedy night in a basement bar he was performing at. Later that night, someone he knew referred to me as his girl. This was rare for New York, renowned for its pernicious dating scene. But he told me he was monogamous. He didn't sleep around and hadn't been with anyone for a long time. undoubtedly a lie, and furthermore, the veneer. It was up to me to decide if I wanted him. He wasn't possessive and wouldn't push. But he made his presence known. He commented on my Instagram posts, hoovers, left hearts under my pictures, hoovers, put the palm of his hand on the back of mine, physical control, asked to kiss me, scratched the mosquito bite on the top of my knee, told me he hadn't felt like this for years, magical thinking, and asked for nothing else. After he disappeared, I kept doing searches on his name. This, of course, would be a breach of no contact, but it's likely that this individual had no idea what she was dealing with at this point, and therefore, understandably, went down the route of trying to get answers. I was looking for answers. Was he having a mental breakdown? Had he met someone else? I needed something tangible, either to vindicate myself or punish myself further. To gain the common behaviour of the victim, of going down the wrong routes in the pursuit of a truth. I typed his name into Instagram, but what I found was a black and white drawing of his face in profile. It had been posted 2 months before we'd gone to the clinic. It was accompanied by a hashtag of his full name, and this comment. Unfortunately, the guy in the picture turned out to be a psychopath. It had been posted by a woman called Zoe, a woman who lived in Australia, and shared cheery photographs of herself with friends in sunny outdoor spaces. I must have rewritten my message to Zoe a dozen times. I believed she would think I was crazy. I believed I was crazy. And then she replied, with the kind of goodwill that comes from someone who had expected I would reach out, if not me, then somebody. And then she wrote, "You're actually the second person to reach out to me. The first was a woman called Jessica." The message went on, "She lives in New York." Jessica agreed to meet me. They had connected on Tinder, use of a hunting ground, as we had. She described their first date. It was at a comedy night he was performing at, somewhere he had also taken me. It is common for the narcissist to utilize similar modus operandi with regard to the seduction of individuals. She named his friends who had joined them, men we had both met briefly to begin with, before dates trailed off into nights at home. She had never been to his apartment. His roommates did not want visitors, he told her. Then, for a period, the apartment was riddled with bedbugs and no one was allowed there, not even him. I had also never been to his apartment. His sister was in town for the summer, he had said, and was living in his bedroom while he slept on the sofa. At the end of summer, things had changed for him again. He had lost his place, he told me, and was crashing with friends. For a long time, he kept his things at Jessica's, clothes, toiletries, his protein shakes, a laptop. I listened to her as though I were talking. Similarity of modus operandi. She became pregnant. I became pregnant a few months later. They broke up in December of that same year. He was gone from my life a few weeks after that. I was with him when she was pregnant. Infidelity, balancing intimate sources. She was with him when I was pregnant. Each point landed as a blow. The closer we came to making sense of it, the more senseless it became. Again, this is common, that the more that a victim unearths about the behaviour of the narcissist, the more confusing it becomes, because they don't know that they're dealing with the narcissist, and their emotional thinking makes it difficult for them to accept the logic of the situation they're dealing with. I did not need to imagine the circumstances under which she became pregnant. By now, I asked questions knowing the answers. Had he told you he was autistic? That he'd lost the love of his life in an accident? Did he tell you he'd never been with a woman without using condoms before? And it was important you became his first? Quick fire round, every answer was a yes. And the clinic, I asked, Queens? He took me to the one in Queens. Over the next year, after Jessica and I found each other, more women reached out to Zoe. Many intimate partners, a hallmark of the behaviour of the narcissist. She had edited the caption under the post to read, "Comments on this illustration continuously get taken down. They say things about the person being a psychopath and dangerous to women. I leave it here because it is true. It is not meant to shame, but to alert women that they may be in danger when becoming close to this man. Beneath it, a woman called Samantha commented, I got out of a relationship with him not too long ago. Everything you say is true. Told me his mum was dying of cancer, triangulation, pity play, and stole close to $9,000 from me. Theft, sense of entitlement, lack of emotional empathy. Under that, a reply from someone called Kay. Same thing happened to me. I dated him this past summer. The mum with cancer lie, triangulation, pity play, lie. The taking money and not paying it back, lack of accountability. He also had a girlfriend the entire time we were together, infidelity. Then Olivia, so sorry he did this to you too, took $5,000 from me, theft, sense of entitlement, absence of emotional empathy. Lived with me for a year while he impregnated and stole from other women, infidelity. He's a piece of garbage, and I bet you're wonderful. Be kind to yourself as you work through this. One night, Jessica and I pulled together a list of his friends we had met in those early days, or he had mentioned, comedians, former colleagues, the people he seemed to interact with the most. We tagged them. Look at who your boy is, we wrote. See for yourselves. By the following morning, his friends had commented. Some were horrified. Some publicly expressed that they were. There is a difference. Those friends told other friends. Those comedians told other comedians. In only a few hours, there were hundreds of comments beneath Zoe's post. The women he had hurt arrived in vast numbers. They shared their own stories. Women from all over the world. London, Oslo, Helsinki, Sydney. I doubt that it's a coincidence that his post detonated after the #MeToo movement really blew up and Harvey Weinstein's victims were given a voice. It was clear he had a template, which he applied every time. We learnt from each other that he told us he was in hospital or a suicide clinic, pity play, asked us for money to pay for his meds, sense of entitlement, residual benefit, or the admission fee, or one treatment or another that would save his life. All these relationships overlapped with other women. Sense of entitlement, multiple relationships, infidelity. Most wrote of giving him money, of losing items from their homes, pregnancy, lies, and his mother, who was, as it turns out, coming back to life again and again, but unfortunately dying of cancer on a regular basis. Once again demonstrating, of course, the way that he has told lies and has triangulated these individuals. Then he did a strange thing. He created two accounts of his own. He called one I Love with his first name and the other I Love using his first and last names. It said it all. He loved himself. Grandiosity. But more sinisterly, he was making us proclaim our love for him each time we typed the profile's name to check for any update or response, which many of us were doing. There were two reasons we were looking. First, to keep ahead of his next move, but second, if I am honest, because it was a glorious ghoulish car crash unfolding in front of our eyes. He was falling apart in real time, and frankly, it was wonderful to see. Pausing there, this is often the case that the victim wants to see the narcissist get their comeuppance. But of course, as I've explained to many, many people, ultimately, whilst this feels satisfying, it is not in your best interests. You place yourself at increased risk of being hoovered, increased risk of adverse consequence. You're going to be giving fuel to the narcissist, which was the narcissist wants, if you're going to have a form of interaction. And watching all of this is a breach of no contact, which increases your emotional thinking. Now he wrote that he had a fiancée in London. He said he was a better man with her. She'd give him the peace none of us could. He accused us of having an agenda fueled by jealousy, blame-shifting, since he had moved on with her. He claimed his fiancée had seen the post and she had laughed about it. Triangulation, dismissiveness, lie. He referred to himself as peaceful and godly. Delusion. He claimed if any of what we had said was true, that he'd used people for affection, money, and a desire to be wined and dined. He had learnt this from every woman that had ever existed. Provocation. I understand your anger, he wrote publicly to us. I did lie to you, saying I cared about you, liked you, thought you attractive, pretended not to care about your gross bodies, your messed up teeth, lying about loving your personalities, that were as captivating as shoe inserts. Insult, provocation, haughtiness, arrogance, dismissiveness. Yet amongst his ongoing outbursts, the stories of betrayal, the heartbreak, the surreal mayhem of it all, there was jubilation, relief, and elation. We made fun of him openly in the comments. Challenge fuel. We mocked his absurdity. Challenge fuel. To the individual, what he had done was isolating and bleak, but to the chain locking itself around him, the man was a farce. Indeed he was, but of course he doesn't recognise that he is, and his victims continuing to interact with him are just continuing to heighten their own emotional thinking and are just continuing to fuel him, meaning he wins. The victim continues, have you heard the story about him being raised by his Japanese martial arts instructor? The plot from The Karate Kid, character trait acquisition. What about the aunt who worked as a lawyer when you threatened to sue him? The same aunt that worked for an abortion clinic when you were pregnant. That same aunt who also worked for an airline when he's flying back and forth to Atlanta 18 times a week. Triangulation, delusion. We discussed the items that had gone missing from our homes, comically working out how to reunite each one with its rightful owner. Had anyone got an East Coast hat, a Los Angeles sweatshirt, a leopard print leather belt, some dungarees, a jumpsuit, a video camera? Away from the public comments, we created a group chat where we kept on top of it all. Again, breach of no contact. Seemingly a sensible thing to do, but ultimately not. One woman compiled a list of his contacts on Facebook, another from Twitter. Another turned to the mobile payment app Venmo and collected the names of women publicly documented as having given him money there. We tagged them all so they could see the full extent of his actions. Then we contacted dating sites with every email address we knew he used and reported him. By the end of the first week, he had been banned from 2. What we were learning through our conversations with each other was that there was no evidence of him having had a job for quite some years. Lack of accountability and responsibility. He had offered a different employer's name to each woman throughout our simultaneous time with him. Lie. There appeared to be only 2 organisations in the previous years where he'd actually worked. One fired him for having a bad attitude. The other had him arrested. No one heard what became of a grand larceny charge, criminal activity, sense of entitlement, lack of accountability, although comments about witnessing an arrest on the shop floor appear from old colleagues who had also by now come to contribute to the post. His comedy shows were dreadful, lazy, with barely any audience, so there was clearly no money to be made there. Women were his purpose, we were his purpose, or rather, people. With only the women who had come forward, it seemed he had taken nearly $100,000 from them. Theft, sense of entitlement, lack of accountability. He had no apartment, no rent, scarcely paid for his own flights or overseas accommodation, food or transport. Sense of entitlement. Freeloading. No doubt the point of the money was to spend it on and seduce women before requesting significant amounts in return. Similar to the way that the Tinder swindler operated. But I believe there was also the thrill of knowing he had taken it. Either way, women were his only livelihood, and the post had jeopardised it all. Within a month, he moved to London. Assertion of control by withdrawal. He hastily married the woman he'd been referring to as fiancée. Assertion of control through marriage. The post stayed up, and women continued to find it, new women. In the weeks following the blow-up from the Instagram post, I thought about his friends. There were the photographers, the designers, the people who ran their own successful businesses, the friends who were well-travelled. He surrounded himself with worth, character trait acquisition. It was an alibi. I called his friend Mike. He gave thoughtful answers to the questions I asked, and often hesitated when considering his own complicity. On many levels, all his friends knew what he was doing to us, I said. We knew there were a lot of women. We guessed he was probably homeless and staying between women's houses. We talked about how he's bringing a different girl out every time, and honestly, we didn't bother to remember what she was called. We were looking at her thinking, nice to meet you, but I'm not even going to learn your name. You'll be gone by the next time. Notice that these individuals saw the behaviour, but thought not to do anything about it. I suppose what I wanted was that his friends had been duped as much as we had been. My sense of shame might have lessened if we, the women who had been deceived, were to alone. That it wasn't our fault because we were women. That it didn't happen to us because we were women. Instead, what I learnt was that many of the people in his life knew he was living between women. Knew we thought we were in serious, committed, monogamous relationships. Knew he thought so little of us as people. He had hidden in plain sight. Wasn't it odd he had a different woman every week, I asked. It wasn't strange. He was just being a man. I have a lot of friends who run a lot of different girls. Hearing him have multiple women wasn't anything I could change, Mike said. I replied that there was no issue there. Plenty of women enjoy the same, so long as everybody knows what the deal is, so long as the sexual partners, no matter how many there might be, are consensual, aren't a punchline to a long-standing joke. Alongside misplaced musings on mental health, he started posting screenshots on Instagram of his preferred conversations after the revelations. In one, a friend told him, My advice to you after listening to your recent podcasts, you might just need to delete all your social media and start again as you're starting your new positive life. Get rid of all the negative energy or just block all the bitches bringing all the hate. That way you can live your life in peace. You have apologized and explained why you did what you did. If these salty bitches keep on talking shit, that's on them. 7 months after the Instagram post reached its peak, a few months after he married a woman in the UK, Sarah met him on Tinder in London. Infidelity, use of a hunting ground. He told her he was recently married, but they had quickly separated. The reason he claimed was his wife had been seeing someone else at the start of their relationship, and his trust was now gone. Projection. He had already introduced his mental health problems to Sarah on their first date. Lack of boundary recognition, oversharing, triangulation, revealing that psychosis and schizophrenia ran in his family, but he was medicated and neither affected him. But as time went on, Sarah grew suspicious, unable to believe a lot of what he said. I started looking online and realised he was very much still married, infidelity, and clearly not separated, lie, Sarah said. There were also recent photos of him wearing his wedding ring. He had never worn it when he'd been with me. Alongside photographs of his very ongoing marriage, Sarah also found Zoe's original Instagram post. Now aware of the lies and abuse, Sarah confronted him. He had an answer for everything. He told me the Instagram comments were by women who he'd not been nice to and were bitter about his newfound happiness, blame shifting. Then he directed me to another Instagram account which he had created, portraying himself as some kind of self-styled mental health guru. Grandiosity. She confronted him again. This time he responded saying he had taken photos of me naked, sleeping, just to masturbate over. He texted a screenshot of a WhatsApp gallery full of photos and videos of me that I hadn't consented to or even been aware of. I think he did it because he knew he wasn't going to get anything else out of me. I think it was the only way he could demean me to make himself feel powerful at that point. Triangulation, invalidation, belittlement. As a consequence of this, Sarah called the police. They sent 3 police officers to her flat. The crime was the act of voyeurism, which is a sexual offence. The police asked Sarah to think carefully about whether she wanted to make a formal statement. Undeterred, Sarah wanted at the very least for his actions to be on police records somewhere. As part of the police investigation, the police asked Sarah if she would let them download content from her phone. She refused. I had shown them all the evidence I had, and I felt uncomfortable handing over control of the intimate details of my life to strangers, especially given that I had gone to them having just been violated so seriously. They were never clear on what information they would use. Messages between men and other men I dated, perhaps, would that be used against me? How familiar this attitude was. Had the lady worn a skirt too short? Had the lady led him on? Had the lady sent naked photographs of herself to other men? Did the lady have many sexual partners? Was her cleavage on display in photographs on Instagram? Did she contort her body to take a selfie that showed her pert butt? Was she promiscuous, a slut, a slag, a desperate, bitter? Naturally, pausing there, the police ask all of these questions because that's what the victim would face in cross-examination. He told the police Sarah knew he was taking the photographs of her, and because they had previously exchanged intimate photos, it was clear Sarah continued to be up for it. Denial, blame shifting. In March 2019, they decided no further action would be taken. The CPS cited my unwillingness to hand over my phone, Sarah said. I had actually provided evidence, whereas he had simply said, I didn't do it. They said we had both given credible accounts. I took this to mean that his account was given more credibility than my own. The author of this article states, I was by now living back in London, and women in neighbourhoods all around me had been through what the women all around us in Brooklyn had. When I wrote about my experience with him on Twitter, more women got in touch. His agent dropped him. Comedy clubs cancelled his gigs. Comedians distanced themselves from him. although ultimately it doesn't seem that that would have much impact on him because his comedian career wasn't really going anywhere. Before it appeared, nobody in the comedy world had taken our serious stories seriously or cared. But now the people around him took swift action in a way I had not seen before. What struck me was how I had needed to become successful for something to happen. I had needed to have a reputable career as a writer to be heard. I had needed to build a large enough platform to be taken seriously. I realised that I hadn't fallen for something or someone so wicked because I was deeply flawed or fucked up, because I was naive, because I was drunk, because I was damaged, because I deserved it. Rather, he had come after me, come after all of us, because we were everything he wished he was, but knew he wasn't. Well, actually, that isn't the accurate outcome. He came after those individuals because he recognised that ultimately he'd be able to control them. Subconsciously, he was aware of this, that they were all excellent providers of fuel, and he was able to access character traits and residual benefits. That each of them was vulnerable to his overtures, and he was able to do it time and time again, because he doesn't see people as people, he sees them as objects. It wasn't a case of the fact that he knew that he wasn't these things and he wished to be the things that these women were. That's something that a victim would tell themselves in order to provide themselves with some comfort. He quite simply was a predator, utilising a variety of manipulations as described, and did so with a substantial fuel matrix as he drew women time and time into it to then steal from them and abuse them. A useful living example of a narcissist in action and the responses of the victims, whereby they gained a degree of satisfaction from the way that he was treated, but ultimately they just simply gave him fuel. They didn't realise that's what they were doing, and they continued to interact with this individual, watching what he was doing, thinking that it was a catharsis, but actually acting against their better interests. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.